Okay, yeah, everyone. So I'm going to do a Dhamma sharing with you, talk a little bit about the Dhamma from my own little perspective over here. And then we have a chance to have some questions and answers towards the end of this. As a good disciple of Ajahn Brahmali, I often like to kind of play around a little bit and just mess around and just have a bit of fun. I think that's one of the important things in life, is to actually have a bit of fun in this world. And one of the things that I have recognized, and this is actually, I think, very much what Ajahn Brahm is about, is the idea that when you are playful, when you have a bit of fun, when you just enjoy life, you don't take yourself too seriously, actually meditation goes much better as a consequence. If you get too serious about things, if you think that you have to keep the precepts and you're very serious about everything, and you kind of have to force yourself to sit on the meditation seat, and you have very serious discussions about Abhidhamma and other abstruse and difficult subjects, that seriousness leads to a certain hardness inside. It often has to do with a sense of self that is quite developed. The sense of self comes with that kind of serious attitude. And if you are more playful in your life, it means that you are less serious. There's often less sense of self. There's more gentleness, more kindness inside. We share a joke with our fellow Buddhists, and we just have a bit more fun in life in general. And that leads, I think, to a mind state, which actually is very useful on the Buddhist path. And the mind state that actually works for meditation practice is the mind state which is gentle, which is soft, which has a lot of happiness and joy inside. So we're kind of leaning the mind towards these things, that sense of gentleness and fun. So being a bit playful in life, I think, is very, very useful. I'm not saying we should be childish, but just a little bit childlike, maybe, just to kind of be a bit more, not so take the world so seriously, because the world is just a mess anyway. Why take the world seriously? It's just walking out doing all kind of things in its own way. You just have to forget about the world and kind of leave the world aside, and then live our life to the best of our ability, despite what the world actually does. So because I like to be a bit playful, very, very often I'm the senior monk here at Bodhinyana Monastery. And very often when all the lay people come during the day and I'm the senior monk and they come to do the food offering, similar to what you do in Sri Lanka, here it's a little bit more centralized in a way. But when they come and they're all sitting there in the room, I often ask them the question. I'm just kind of being playful, just messing around with the lay people. And I often ask them, how are you? And when you ask people in Australia, how are you? There is usually only one answer. And the answer is always good. I'm good. And so I ask them, are you sure that you are good? Have you really thought about this properly? Or are you just saying things coming out of your mouth really, really fast? This is the way things are in Australia. And so then they start thinking about it. And I've done this so many times, asking them, are you sure that you are good? What is actually really going on in you? That now, when I ask the people, how are you? They become quiet because they are afraid of answering me. They are kind of afraid of giving the wrong answer when I ask them. And that's when I know that I've kind of succeeded in messing around and being a bit playful, because they understand that there is something a bit more just fun going on with this kind of question. But it is a very interesting question. How are you? Because I think if we contemplate that question, we can actually realize a little bit about what Buddhism is about, what the Buddhist path is about, and how it works. And so I say to the lay people, after I've kind of been messing around a little bit and saying silly things and all of these kind of things, and because I'm a Ajahn Brahm disciple, I'm allowed to be a bit silly as a monk. And I say to them, well, the first thing that we should contemplate is, well, what would the Buddha say in this kind of situation? So if you went to the Buddha and you said to the Buddha, how are you? What do you think the Buddha would say? Would he say, good? Maybe, I don't know, maybe he would say good, but it's an interesting thing, right? Because when we think about the Buddha, that is when we often get the real answers. This is the awakened mind coming from the real insight into existence. So what would the Buddha say? And I used to think that the Buddha might come up with some kind of very profound reply. Yeah, the Buddha might say, I don't know what, maybe he would say something like, oh, how are you? He would say, dukkha arising, dukkha passing away. Yeah, suffering coming into existence, suffering passing away. And this is one of those very profound teachings that you find in the suttas. You find it in the famous Kalalgoda Sutta, which is the sutta in the Nidana Samyutta. And it's a very famous sutta, and the right view of the world. When you have right view, when you become an Aryan, when you become a noble person, when you're an Arahant or a Sovan or whatever, what you see dukkha arising, dukkha passing away. Yeah, the experience of the world. This is how you experience the world. And this is very profound. Yeah, and this already contradicts the idea that you are good. Yeah, it already shows that the idea that you are good is actually a very shallow reply, because the Buddha, who really understands, well, he says suffering arising, suffering passing away. And I remember, Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm is like one of the happiest people I know. He's always messing around, always just laughing. His meditation always very deep, and he comes out and he has a big smile on his face and all of these kind of things. And then he will give a Dhamma talk and he will say, oh, everything is just suffering. Yeah. And this is kind of powerful. Yeah, when the really happy people in the world, when they say that it is all suffering, then you know that there is a real problem. And this shows you something about the idea of suffering. The idea of suffering is very profound. It is very profound. We think that suffering sometimes is just about counting the suffering of life, counting the problems that we have, whether it is an economic crisis in your country or the wars going on or the family problems that we might have. But no, suffering is actually an insight. Suffering is about understanding our reality. It takes a Buddha, it takes an Aryan to really understand suffering. So this is one of the contemplations that we should do if we really want to understand the reality of things. We have to contemplate these things in a much deeper way. And one of the very simple ways of doing that is to kind of see when you have some success in your meditation, when maybe you get some samadhi, you get some one-pointedness on the breath, your mindfulness is becoming a bit more sharp. If you compare that to the mind which craves, if you compare that to the ordinary mind and ordinary life, always restless, always agitated, always doing things, if you start to see that, that is where you can start to see suffering in a deeper way and understand where real happiness is to be found. It is to be found in a completely different direction from what we normally think in the world. And this already is the beginning of that insight on the path of Buddhism to what suffering really is about. So use these ideas of the Buddha, contemplate these things, because only when you contemplate these things again and again and again do this actually start to have a real meaning in your life. So suffering is to be understood. Suffering is not just an experience here and now. It is a deeper idea that we actually have to keep on contemplating to really get our minds around, until one day you become like the Buddha and you see suffering arising, suffering passing away. What does that mean? Well, it means two things. It means that in our life, we have all the time, there are experiences, and those experiences is a continuous change of one thing happening, one thing arising, and everything something arises, actually, it is an instance of suffering. Because from the Buddha's point of view, everything really is suffering. You have to withdraw completely from the world to get out of that. But in a more profound sense, the idea of suffering arising and suffering passing away is like the idea of rebirth. You get reborn, every time you get reborn, is suffering arising. Every time you pass away, it is suffering passing away until you get reborn again straight afterwards, then suffering arising again. This is kind of the deeper idea, avoiding the idea of rebirth. But I'm not really going to talk about that. This is not really the topic of my talk, but it's a little bit part of the topic, but it's not the main idea. So I thought, well, the Buddha, maybe he would say that. Maybe he would say suffering arising, suffering passing away. But a lot of the people that the Buddha would meet would just be ordinary people. Yeah, people like who weren't even Buddhist. And if he said to them, suffering arising, suffering passing away, they would just shake their head and they would walk off in the wrong direction and they would join the Jains or some kind of other religion, right? They wouldn't be interested in Buddhism anymore because Buddhism is just too profound, too difficult to understand. So I think the usual way, and this is what you see in the sutras as well, and this is the beauty of the Buddha. When the Buddha meets somebody, he actually is very friendly. Yeah, he talks to them, and they have a conversation together, and they may ask the Buddha, how is your health? And he will say, my health is okay. So if we were to use the modern idea and ask the Buddha, how are you? Actually, I don't think he would say suffering arising, suffering passing away. He would probably say, good, I'm well, my health is fine. How are you? How are you? Probably that's what he would respond. Because the Buddha was a man who belonged to our world. The Buddha knew what is socially appropriate. He knows how to put people at ease, how to make people feel relaxed. And then when people are at ease, when they are relaxed, when they feel accepted by the Buddha, then it is like the heart opens up. The mind becomes peaceful. The mind is ready to hear the real teachings. And this is like the skillfulness of the Buddha. So this is, I think, an important point in our life, that sometimes some of the speech that we have is just pleasant speech. We ask each other, how are you? How is your health? Or can I give you some assistance? Can I help in any way? I hope you are okay. And this little speech like this, the little lubricant of social interaction is actually very important for us to really feel at ease in the world. So don't forget that and follow the Buddha in using this kind of speech in the right way. So this is to me, how the Buddha very likely would answer the question of how are you? But what about us? How should we answer that question? Because we are not the Buddha. We don't have the same kind of insight into the nature of reality as the Buddha had. And so how do we answer this question? And again, there's a number of ways you can answer it. You can just, as I'm just talking now, you can say things like, I am good, just as a thing which makes the social interaction at ease and makes us work well together. That is one way. Another answer you can give, this is the answer Ajahn Brahm always gives. Ajahn Brahm always says, I'm overworked, underpaid. That's Ajahn Brahm's usual answer. So he always likes to mess around as usual. But there's also other answers that you can give. And one of the answers that I sometimes say when people ask me, how are you? I say, good, bad, who knows? Because how are you? What does it mean? Compared to what? Compared to how I was yesterday? Compared to how I was 10 years ago? Compared to the Buddha? Compared to Ajahn Brahm? Compared to Rohanta? Compared to Venerable Metta Vihari? I don't know. Compared to what exactly? What does it mean to be good? And tomorrow I might be better than I am today. So does that mean suddenly I'm bad today? It's kind of meaningful. It's meaningless to say that you are good because there's no real comparison. You can't compare it to anything. It's just everything is always fluctuating. It's just this subjective idea of whether you are good or bad or whatever. So good, bad, who knows is actually not a bad answer. I don't really know how I am because I don't know what to compare it to. All I can say is that, yeah, I think, good enough or something like that, but I can't really compare it to anything else. And so I think the lesson from that is never really to think ourselves in terms of good or bad. That is not very helpful. Because if you think of yourself as good, then you might decline tomorrow and you might go down and then you will sorrow because you have gone down. And if you think of yourself as bad, well, that's also not maybe very helpful because life is like this. Life goes up and down and we need more. We need a different kind of approach to this question. So I would say the Buddhist answer to the question of how are you? And the answer that hopefully many of you will be able to give when you are practicing well and the path is going in the right way, you should give the answer, that you're getting better. Yeah, because if you are getting better, if you can see that there is a change in your life, then you are fulfilling the path of the Buddha. One of the marvelous things that the Buddha was always talking about and always saying was that when we contemplate our life, when we judge our life, we should always ask ourselves, are we growing in good qualities and declining in the bad ones? And if you are growing in good qualities and declining in the bad ones, it means you are becoming more and more happy, stage by stage. It means you are fulfilling the practice that the Buddha laid down for us. If the Buddha was around, he would be proud of you. Yeah, if you did this. Isn't that a beautiful thought? The Buddha would be proud of you. The Buddha would maybe pat you on the back and said, well done, carry on. No, that's Ajahn Brahmali who says that, not the Buddha. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It is, well done, carry on. You're doing well. The Buddha would be proud of you. Yeah, remember, the Buddha is a human being just like us. He would be around. He would look like a monk. But imagine being praised by the Buddha. There's nothing more beautiful than that. That goes straight to the heart. And then you know you are on the right track as a consequence. There's a lot of beautiful reflections that we can do about the Buddha in this way. Simple reflections. The idea of meeting the Buddha in a very simple way like this. But it's not only the fact that you are getting more happy, but if you are improving in your practice, if you're going in the right direction, all you have to do is to carry on. And if you carry on in that way, one day you will have to come to the very end of the path. There is no choice about it, because if you're always improving, it only goes in one direction. It goes all the way to Nibbana. There's no choice. So gradually improving, becoming more and more happy, more and more still. So if you can say to me, to Ajahn Brahm, to your fellow monastics, to Venerable Metta Vihari, to anyone, whoever it is, if you can say with a confidence in your heart, I am getting better, then you are actually practicing well, then you are on the right track, then you're going in a good direction. That should be the answer that all of us as Buddhists should be able to do. So this answer means that anything we do in life, whenever we have to make decisions, whenever we have to make a choice, whenever we have to decide whether we're going to come to the Uposatha days and practice meditation, whenever we decide where we're going to live, what we're going to do, all of these kind of things, the answer to all of those questions should be based on that simple idea: what is going to make me better in the practice? What is going to increase my good qualities? And what is going to decline the bad ones? That our whole life should be about that. Because if we do succeed in this kind of result, where we're getting better and better all the time, then we are fulfilling the meaning of life itself. And if you fulfill the meaning of life, then I guarantee you, you will be even more happy, because you have a real sense of purpose, you have a real sense of goal, and life actually becomes very meaningful as a consequence. So how can we do this? How can we actually practice in a way so that we get better all the time? Yeah, and of course, this is what the Buddhist path is all about. Yeah, the idea of Sila, Samadhi, Panya, the idea of the Noble Eightfold Path, the ideas that is found in the Sutta Pitaka, all of that is about how we can improve, how we can reduce our bad qualities and improve our good ones. This is what it's all about. So you can look at this question from many, many different angles. But one angle, which actually I think is very important and maybe isn't often considered enough, is the idea of perception. Sanya in Pali, perception in English. And one of the kind of beautiful teachings of the Buddha is where he talks about the idea of perception, and where he says that if we understand the various kind of perceptions in the right way, then we are on the track towards awakening, on the track towards Bodhi, to Nibbana itself. And he says that what we need to understand the perceptions that lead to decline. We have to understand those. We have to understand which perceptions lead to stability. We have to understand which perceptions lead to improvement. And then we have to understand those perceptions that lead to the penetration to the truth, understanding the truth. And if we understand which perceptions leads where, then we have a very powerful tool. And that is the tool of looking at the world in the right way, developing those perceptions that lead forward, that lead to an improvement in our minds, and abandoning those perceptions that lead away from moving onwards on the path. So perceptions, the simple idea of understanding perceptions in the right way, which ones are appropriate, which ones are not, is actually enough to take you all the way to awakening itself. That's kind of fascinating. So what do we mean by perception? What do we mean by sanya? And what it really means is how we relate to the world, how we look at the world around us. Yeah, many of our perceptions are given. You can't do much about them, but they don't matter so much. You know, you have a perception of a room of people meditating together. You have a perception of a Dhamma talk. You have a perception of a room, the lights, the ceilings, and all of these kind of things, human beings. And those perceptions are kind of irrelevant. But a lot of our perceptions are things that we add to the world, things that come from us, and they don't actually exist in the world in their own right, but it's how we deal with the world, how we look at the world. And that is where we can make changes. How do we look at other people? Do we see them as friends? Do we see them as beings who suffer? Do we see them as robots? Do we see them as autonomous beings? How do we deal with other people? How do we think about the world around us? Do we think it as something delightful? Or do we see it as something troublesome that maybe we should let go of and move onwards on the spiritual path instead? And the Buddha, when you go to the suttas, and you go especially to the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Anguttara Nikaya, there's lots of these ideas of developing perceptions. You have one of my favorite ones is the Sabbaloka Anabhiratta Sanya, the seeing the non-delight in the whole world. There is perceptions about giving things up, the Pahana Sanya. There's, of course, the important perceptions of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. There are perceptions of the foulness of the body, the patikula sanya. There is the adinava sanya, the danger in things. So there's a large number of perceptions that the Buddha is talking about in the suttas. And all of these perceptions lead us on the right track. But one of the really important things, and one of the things we should really develop are not always the very profound perceptions, because many of the things I've been talking about now are very profound. And because they are very profound, they can be very hard to really grasp. It depends on how deep your meditation is. If you are a good meditator, you may be able to grasp some of these ideas. But for the majority of people, it's very difficult to grasp some of these perceptions. So very often is what we have to do is we have to start with the very simple things in life. And if we can understand some of the really simple perceptions, then we can go a very, very long way on the Buddhist path. Remember, the simple perceptions are not really simple at all, because some of these very simple things like watching the breath or being kind or avoiding doing bad things, etc., etc., all of these very simple things on the path actually go with you all the way to the very end. They are just simple in the sense that we can relate to them. That's why they are simple. They're not simple in the sense that they don't take you all the way to the end of the path. And I have found that in my own monastic life, that if I focus on things that I can relate to, I can understand, then it is really powerful. And that is very often where the development happens. So what do I mean by this? And what I mean is a very simple perception that you find in the idea of right view, for example. So the right view in Buddhism, two of the most important things in the idea of right view is the idea of rebirth is one. The other one is the idea of karma. And these are also perceptions that we can develop, because the idea of rebirth, you might agree that there is such a thing as a rebirth, But to fully understand it, to understand its impact, to understand what it actually means to you, you have to develop that perception in a way that actually aids the path. So sometimes people seem to think that, okay, I believe there is rebirth, so I have right view. But actually, it is not as simple as that. Believing in rebirth is only the beginning. And then you have to develop this idea, make it real in a very different way. And as you do that, then it starts to have power on you, and it starts to have an emotional impact, and it starts to drive your ability to practice the Buddhist path as a consequence. And it's interesting in the suttas. You find that, for example, sometimes they talk about all the ascetics who had wrong views in ancient India. They talk about all the what is called the Titikaras, the ford makers, the people who had of different religions. And they talk about the wrong view. And the main wrong view that all of them had was the idea that they didn't believe in rebirth, or they didn't believe in karma. Yeah, this was always the case for all of these leaders. You know, there's a standard set of 6 of these religious leaders in the suttas. The Nigantanathaputta, the leader of the Jains, was one. And you had Makkali Gosala, you had Purana Kassapa, you had Sanjaya Belatiputta, and a couple more, Ajita Kesakambala and Pakudha Kachayana, or something like that. And almost all of them had mistaken ideas about karma and rebirth. So this is a core problem in people's understanding of the world, not really understanding karma and rebirth, right? When we get corrupt politicians in our society, and this happens everywhere around the world, the main reason we get that is because they haven't really properly considered karma and rebirth. They may say they believe in it, but they don't really understand what it actually means. They would never be corrupt if they understood the danger of these kind of things. So we need to reflect on these things in more detail. And so we start with the suttas. We start reading what the Buddha has to say about these things. And this gives you some idea about rebirth. It gives you some idea of the dangers in rebirth. The Buddha talks about, you know, the negative consequences of bad karma. He talks about the good consequence of good karma. And we get some understanding of it simply by reading the suttas. But to my mind, it is often not enough just to read the suttas, because the suttas are very kind of, they are very, what is the right word? They don't really have many stories. Yeah, they are very kind of structured in a slightly cold way. They give you the prose, they tell you that there is rebirth, but there's no story behind it. It can be difficult to emotionally relate to what is happening in the suttas. So we start with that, but then I would also recommend you to take it one step further and to find stories about rebirth, stories about things that relate to the idea of rebirth, like near-death experiences, like children who remember their past lives. Many of these things are available in the world. And when you start to read about these things, it is actually extraordinarily powerful. I have found this in my own life. Sometimes you read the stories and it's actually emotionally very, very powerful, because you can really, this is another human being telling what happened to them. And when you read about these things, and it has been done by good researchers who are trustworthy, who you know that you can actually have faith in and confidence in what they are saying, then you are seeing something in a very different way from how you're seeing it in the suttas. And I actually read a book recently, not so long ago, and that's why I'm talking about this. This is a book by an American researcher. He is maybe the most famous researcher in the world when it comes to near-death experiences. His name is Bruce Grayson. And he has a book called After, and After is all about what happens after you kind of die, and then you come back again later on. And people tell about these extraordinary experiences of leaving their body and then going to a realm which maybe is very happy, or it is maybe miserable, or it is somewhere in between. Yeah. And they go to this realm and they see themselves in a different way, and then they realize actually life doesn't stop when you die. And then they have these extraordinary things that happen to them. And one of the very interesting things that happens to people is this idea of the life review. Yeah, you see your life in review. And one of the very powerful things, and this is, I think, really worthwhile reflecting on, one of the very powerful things about the life review experience is that not only do you see your own actions in review over a whole lifetime, but you also get to experience how the other people around you felt when you did good and bad things to them. You can experience the other people's feelings. So if you did something nice to somebody, if you said a nice word to somebody, if you gave them a gift, if you gave them a hug or a pat on the back, you are fine, or whatever it is, you will experience the positive emotions of that person because you're acting with kindness. But if you do something which is not nice, if you backbite with somebody or you tell them off in a harsh way, which is not really appropriate, then you can feel the experience, the negative emotions in that other person. And you can imagine how powerful this is, when that happens. And what these people say is that they feel this sense of regrets about how they have lived, a sense of remorse. And this leaves a very, very powerful imprint on the mind. And then when they come back again to the human world after this near-death experience, they can no longer do bad things. They have to be kind all the time because they understand for the first time in their life the power of kindness and the danger of not being kind. That's kind of extraordinary. Yeah, you get this feeling, it's immediate experience of what karma really means. Karma means that your conscience has been struck by your actions in this life, and you understand the real danger. You don't, even the tiniest wrong act, you don't want to do it anymore because you understand how dangerous it actually is. So please read some of these stories because this gives an added layer to what we see in the Buddhist texts. It is not enough just to understand what the Buddha taught. We have to make it emotional because we are driven by emotions as human beings. When you really feel this in a deep and powerful way, what is actually going on, it becomes emotional for you. It becomes visceral. It becomes a deep feeling inside. And you really become afraid of doing what is wrong. And you become highly, highly motivated to live with kindness as a consequence. And what was also very fascinating was that this researcher was saying it is not just that these experiences are life-changing, because they really are life-changing when you have these kind of experiences. But other people who hear about these experiences, other people who really understand what is actually going on, it is also life-changing for them. So in other words, if we read about these things, if we try to understand what these people are going through, it is going to have an impact on us too. We don't have to have the near-death experience to understand what is going on. All we have to do is to listen to what happened. And it was interesting. We were just doing a workshop yesterday at Dhamma Center here in Perth. And we were discussing the idea of near-death experience just a little bit. And there was a lady in the audience, and this actually happened to be a lady with Sri Lankan background. Lots of people with Sri Lankan background here in Perth. And she said that she had a near-death experience, right? She said this in this whole group. And this is so wonderful. And I asked her, please, when you have an opportunity, can you please give some more details? I would love to hear about your experience. And I would recommend all of you, if any of you in your group has had this kind of experience, share it with each other, because these things have a powerful impact, not just on you, but also potentially on the people around you. It makes these things real. It makes these things felt emotions. It makes these things drivers on the Buddhist path, and as such, incredibly useful. So share these things with you, and then you are doing a service to actually to everyone around you. You're building up perceptions in people's minds that are going to be very useful on the Buddhist path. So that is the idea of reading about these things. And on the idea of sharing, actually sharing these experiences, we have another lady staying with us now. She is a Western lady, but she also had some very interesting experiences in her life. She's a very good meditator and a very, very, very profound spiritual practitioners. She lives by herself. She lives like a monastic on this large property completely by herself. And she has lived like that for years and years. She's more monastic than the monastics in some ways. And she was telling this experience that she had. Yeah, she had some very interesting experience in her life. And one of her experiences was when she had some kind of very, very powerful allergic reaction. And the allergic reaction led to a seizure. You know, a seizure is when you have like an epileptic fit and your body seizes up. And the fit she was having was so powerful and so strong that she actually, her body was kind of becoming stiff. Her body was doing all kind of jerky reactions. And it was threw her out of the bed many meters away, and she was just lying on the floor, and she couldn't breathe. She couldn't do anything because the epileptic fit was so powerful. And she said that while she was in this state, she realized that she thought, I'm going to die. Yeah, this is it. I've had it. I'm finished. But then the thought came to her, actually, I cannot afford to die. I still have a family. I still have parents. I think she may have had a husband at that time, not anymore, but maybe she had a husband at that time. And she said, I cannot really afford to die. And she said, at that moment, the one thing that was very powerful for her was this feeling of remorse and regret over the small little things that she had done in her life. The things that they're nothing really. They're kind of maybe using words that are a little bit too harsh or something like that. But she felt remorse over tiny little things in her conduct. And this was what brought her back again out of that death experiences. And gradually she was able to breathe again. And gradually she was able to kind of fill her lungs with oxygen. She said it took about half an hour. And then after about half an hour, she knew that she was going to live. She was going to be okay. But the experience she had was this idea, when she was very near death, was this fear of remorse, the fear of regret, understanding that any little bad action has a very, very powerful impact on your mind and really has the chance of dragging you down in the future. And she told me that after this experience, the idea of sila, the idea of sati sampajanya, going with sila, the idea of always guarding your mind, always knowing what you're doing, always judging whether you're living in the best possible way. Are you living right by body, speech, and mind or not? That sati sampajanya about your sila is always in her mind. She never forgets sila anymore. It is always there and always guiding her in the right direction. And that is ultimately the idea, the purpose of remembering future lives, remembering rebirth, remembering the idea of karma, is that it makes for sati sampajanya, it makes for yoniso manasikara, that is so powerful that you're always judging at the back of your mind, am I living to the best of my ability? Am I practicing sila in the best possible way that I can? And if you do it, if you live in that way, if you're able to establish that kind of mindfulness in your mind that always guides you, always looks out for you, then you're going to make very, very quick progress on the path. It means that you ask you in every moment, is what am I doing right now? Is it appropriate? This is the first question. Is it right? And if it isn't right, then you change your direction. And here you have to be honest with yourself. We cannot really afford to delude ourselves or confuse ourselves about whether we really are virtuous or not. We have to be very honest with ourselves. Is there a defilement in my heart? Is there a problem? Am I being too greedy? Am I being do I have a little bit of ill will or whatever? And then we guide ourselves in the right direction. But that is not enough. It is not enough just to ask yourself whether you're doing the right thing. But we should also ask ourselves the question, am I doing the best thing I can do? Can I do the good things even better? Can I imbue my actions with more compassion in the world? Can I really look after people in a more powerful way than I'm already doing? And this becomes even more powerful because then we are actually developing our mind in the here and now, always leaning it towards the good qualities, never leaning it, not being satisfied with what we have, but leaning it towards a sense of even deeper appreciation, contentment, compassion, metta, and all of these kind of good qualities. So when you look at people, always have compassion, always have metta, never allow any other bad ideas to come into your mind. If someone is not living in the right way, understand that compassion is the right way. When you are in the middle of other people, never think about yourself. Never think about how am I acting. Never think, will other people like me? Never think about these things at all. They are irrelevant. Who cares if other people will like you? Never focus on yourself. Always focus on the others. That is the right kind of focus. The focus on ourselves is like a negative focus. It's very self-centered. It's small. It reduces the mind. It is fearful because other people seem dangerous to us. Have compassion in all possible cases. Forget about yourself. Allow your mind to go out into the world. And as you do that, you're living with more kindness. You're living with a more expanded mind. And then when you come on the Uposatha days like we do today, you sit down and meditate, you will start to really feel the changes inside of you. You will be more happy and content with yourself. You will know in a deep way that you are living in the right way. You will have a sense that you are actually improving in those good qualities. Something deep inside of you is changing. You're becoming more compassionate in a profound way. Meditation is not something that you come back to, and it's not static. It doesn't just stay there in the same way as it always has. It actually changes. You can see that something profound and beautiful is happening here. And I can guarantee you that if you do that, your life will be even more meaningful as a consequence, because you have this sense that you are on the path of the Buddha. You are a real disciple of the Buddha. You're taking the Buddha as your teacher in a real profound way, and you're heading towards the highest happiness that is possible for a human being here. All right. I don't think I have anything more to say, so I will just stop there. So, Rahanta, please fire away if there are any questions or anything here.
Yeah, Bhante, I'll put them on screen.
Great. All right. So, do you want to read them out, Rahanta, or what do we do?
Yes, please, if you don't mind, Bhante.
Okay. So the first question is as follows. Venerable Bhante, when meditating, I notice thoughts that come and go. They skim my attention. But at times, strong waves of thoughts overcome me, and I completely lose my object of meditation. How do I reflect on these two types of thoughts? So it is the same, basically the same problem. In one case, the problem is a bit stronger. In the other case, it is not as strong. But the problem is essentially the same. Yeah, the thoughts are there, and they kind of disturb your attention in a certain way. So very often it is about, it depends at what time in the meditation is happening. Very often if these things happen at the beginning of meditation, it is because you just need more time to kind of slow down and allow things to fade away. In the beginning of meditation, we bring with us so many things from the world, so many things from our life around us. And so it just takes time for things to settle down. So patience is very often the fastest way, and is often the way that actually has most effect. But you remember the reason why we think. There's two reasons why we think. One is because we enjoy the thinking. We think the thinking is important. We think that there are things to be resolved. We think that there are important things that we need to think about. So this is one reason. The other reason why we think is because our meditation is not happy enough. And this gives you the solution to the problem. Yeah, the solution to the problem is to understand that those things that we tend to think about, you have to lessen their importance. You have to understand, actually, they don't matter so much. Yeah, they are not really what ultimately is really important in life. What is really important in life actually is the spiritual practice. The vast majority of things that we think about are the things about the world, things that cannot be resolved, things that don't have any real solutions. And because they don't really have any real solutions, we kind of there's no point in thinking about those things. So you have to see the kind of the uselessness of thinking about the vast majority of things in the world, to see that the world itself isn't all that interesting. And because the world isn't interesting, there's no point in thinking about those things. Yeah. So this is the one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is to actually understand lean the mind towards the happiness of meditation practice, bring up some good thoughts. And this is one of the reasons why the Buddha is almost always talks about the 6 anusatis. The anusatis, they are about recollections, recalling things that give rise to joy. Yeah, joy is such an essential part of the Buddhist path of practice. And if we are able to access some of that joy in our meditation, then it's going to be far more powerful and very easy to keep your mind on the breath. Because if the breath is happy, then your meditation is going to go there. So what are the anusatis that are most useful in your life? You have to ask yourself, where can you bring up joy? And one of the ways of bringing up joy is to recall the Buddha. Yeah, remember the Buddha as your teacher. And I was just saying before, the idea of the Buddha kind of giving you a pat on the back and saying, well done, when you're practicing in the good way. Yeah, that's a beautiful thought. And just that thought of the Buddha saying that to you can be very joyful. Yeah, if you know that that is what the Buddha would say, because that's what he would say. He would encourage you, if you are a good person living in the right way, doing the good things. Or the idea of bowing down to the Buddha, remembering the Buddha guna, the qualities of the Buddha. Don't do this automatically, do this in a way that actually is inspiring. The Buddha is my teacher. Here is someone who really understands happiness and suffering all the way. The Buddha is giving me the highest gift that anyone in the world can give another person. Thank you, Buddha. Sadhu, sadhu, thank you so much for giving this beautiful gift to me. We become so happy when we get a small gift from someone else. Yeah, someone gives you maybe something beautiful in the world, and then you become happy. That gift is nothing compared to the gift of the Buddha. The Buddha's gift to each one of us is the highest gift that one human being can give to another human being. Thank you, Buddha, for giving us this gift. You're giving me the best thing in the whole world. And then you can bow down to the Buddha, even if you just do it in your mind's eye. Bow down to the Buddha and have a deep sense of gratitude within that he gave us these beautiful teachings. So you have to make the idea of the Buddhanusati alive. You have to make it real. You have to make it emotionally impactful. And as you do that, you actually start to become very powerful. You can do the same thing with the Dhamma. You can do it with the Sangha. If you have a favorite monk or nun who you really respect a lot, you can do a similar thing with them. Yeah, and then you can say, thank you for helping. Thank you for being my friend. You can say it to your Kalyana Mittas, the people around you. You can really rejoice in their friendship, and you can feel something in your heart. Wow, thank you so much for being my Kalyana Mitta. If you live really well, you can also, of course, do it with your sila, with your chaga, your generosity, and all of these kind of things as well. So try to use some of these things, because these are very powerful tools, tools given to us by the Buddha, so that we can actually use them. And this will overcome your interest in the world. It will start to show you the power of the spiritual practice, yeah? And the interest in those thoughts, it just disappears, it evaporates, because all that thinking kind of becomes irrelevant when you understand what the spiritual path is all about. So try these kind of things, yeah? Don't, when you get the thinking mind, don't use willpower to overcome it. Don't use the kind of power and kind of, screw up your face and become very stiff and very willful, because if you do that, you're going to have more problems. So have a compassion for yourself. Understand that this is what it is like to be a human being. Human beings, we think too much many times. Yeah, this is the way it is. Have compassion for yourself. Have kindness towards yourself. And as you do that, it will enable you gradually to develop out of that problem. Okay, Rohanta. Okay, so the second question, dear Venerable, how can we get rid of this moha while doing our day-to-day activities? So how can you get rid of moha while doing your day-to-day activities? Well, moha is very deep, yeah, and sometimes we cannot actually necessarily deal with moha directly, because moha is actually it means it's often translated as delusion into English, or translated as maybe confusion is another way of translating it. Now, moha is like the root defilement, the most basic and most fundamental defilement of the mind. But there are other defilements that we can deal with. And when we deal with these other defilements, we are also dealing with moha at the same time. So if you can reduce your sense of greed, if you can reduce your sense of anger, the most important one is to reduce ill will, to have more compassion, more metta, more karuna in our life. And if we can develop these things, actually, you're also reducing the moha at the same time. So that is, in many ways, the simplest way of getting rid of moha is actually to be as kind as you possibly can. A person who has a lot of compassion, has a lot of metta in daily life or at any time, is a person with a very large mind, a very broad mind, a mind which kind of goes out to all the directions. And that kind of mind does not have much moha in it. There's still a little bit of moha at the very root, but not very much at all. So this is one way of dealing with moha. Overcome the ill will, overcome the anger, develop more metta, understand that all beings in this world are confused, they have problems, they're running on programs, they are robots essentially. It's very hard for them to change. Have compassion for yourself, have compassion for them. The other way of overcoming moha is to remember that this world is not as important as we think it is. This comes back with this whole idea of rebirth, comes back with the whole idea of karma. The world is much larger. Remember that all of those people who have seen the near-death experience, who have some kind of experience of rebirth, their attitude is completely changed. They no longer have an interest in this world in the same way. It was very fascinating when I was reading some of these near-death experiences. One of the things they were saying is that when I come back afterwards, my family said to me, "You are changed. You want to help everyone now. You want to kind of look after everybody. What about us? We want you to look more after us." That's what the family would say. You look after the whole world now. What has happened to you? And sometimes they were used to someone who was attached to the family. They were used to someone who would look after the family members in an attached kind of way. And sometimes when that person became too kind to everyone, they felt almost as if they had lost a family member because of their own attachments. So they actually ended up being divorced very often. They found that there was a higher divorce rate among people who had near-death experiences than there were among other people, precisely because they were become too kind. People didn't know how to deal with people who were so kind. So if you end up divorcing because you're too kind, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that is not a bad thing. Don't tell your spouse that I mentioned this, because maybe they will get a bit upset if the monks tell you these kind of things. But This is, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because people sometimes don't really understand kindness. And when people around us become too kind, it becomes uncomfortable because it's as if we are forgetting the attachment that we're supposed to have to our own family members. So this was one of those results of those near-death experiences. So remember that in your own life. Remember that this world is not so important. Whether you succeed or not, whether you can solve the problems or not, whether the world goes this way or that way, whether you have economic problems in the Sri Lankan economy or whatever it is, actually, it is not such a big deal. What really matters is the quality of your heart, is how you live your life. And this is a very powerful part of the idea of right view. This is part of this idea of the Sabbaloka Anabhirata Sanya. Actually, forget about this world a little bit. Remember the big picture. Remember the large picture of rebirth, of life after life. And when you start to see that, that is when you start to live with more care, more kindness, less attachment, less greed, less feelings that status is important, that climbing the corporate ladder, whatever is important. All of those things start to fade into the background as a consequence. Then you get clarity of the mind. Then moha fades into the background, and moha is no longer such a problem. So the problem with moha is that we have to tackle it in an indirect way, because there is very hard to tackle it directly. And when you tackle it in this indirect way, actually you gain the clarity. And then as you keep on practicing, as you keep on deepening your meditation, eventually that will allow you to also deal with moha in the more profound senses as well. And that is, of course, where we're all heading down the track. Okay, so we have the next question. Dear Bhante, religion can incite or pacify. Meditation tends to pacify given samatha. We get stuck in neutral feelings. How to move beyond to understand in a post world full of anxiety narratives, COVID, climate, catastrophe, death, war, etc., and have right perception and action. Yes. So what we have to do, and this is really what I was already talking about now to some extent, the idea that we have to learn to remember that actually the world around us is not as important. And if we get this idea that the world around us is not so important, that what really matters is our spiritual life and our spiritual things, then we start to not take the world so seriously. One of the reasons why people have anxiety is because they think that our future is somehow tied up with the way the world goes. If there is climate change, our future is going to be bad. If there is wars, if there is all of these kind of catastrophes, our future is going to be bad. That's why we have anxiety. Anxiety is always about the future. So we think the future is going to be bad. But is it? Now, I say that the Buddhist answer is that the future, our future, your individual future, actually, the way the world goes is not so important. Your future is not built. It does not depend on what happens in the world so much. It depends much more on how you live. So for a good person, the future is always bright, right? And this is kind of the important point here, is that if you want to build up a good future, don't worry so much about the world, worry instead about how you live. If you live well, your future is always going to be good. The future of good people is a good future. So that is why we should kind of bypass all this anxiety around the world, because actually from a Buddhist point of view, it is not so important. We know that the world is out of control anyway. This is the whole point of the Buddhist idea of anicca, of impermanence. This is the whole idea of the Sabbaloka Anabhirata Sanya. The world is out of control. We don't know what is going to happen next. Now, when there are so many problems in the world, it's a good example of the Buddha's teachings. we can start to understand why the Buddha was talking about these things. We can start to understand that the Buddha was right. Why am I interested in the world when the world is so problematic? The world is always going to be problematic like this. There is no escape. The only escape is through the spiritual path. Live well, be kind, find the refuge within. The refuge within. The Buddha said that the sarana inside is the four satipatthana practices. The four satipatthanas is the mindfulness of breathing. Is the kind of meditation practice that we do. That is where you find the real refuge. So actually, when the world is going bad as it is now, it is actually an opportunity for us. It is an opportunity to understand the nature of reality. When everything is going well, I have always noticed that when the world is going well, the economy is growing, there is no wars around or anything like that, we become stupid. You know what I mean? We become stupid because we think, this is the way it's supposed to be here. Everything is going well. I can relax, just kind of chill out, go on holidays or enjoy kind of how things are. We become stupid. We forget the downside. We forget the problems. When the problems come, that is our chance to increase our wisdom, because that is our chance to remember the Buddha's ideas of the impermanence, the unreliability, the anicca, the adinava, the uncertainty of the world. So take this opportunity. Take it to gain a deeper insight into what actually is going on. Take it, use it to strengthen the spiritual path, because this is what gives the spiritual path real meaning. Yeah? The world is like this. Don't neglect the world. Do a little bit, but do it because you want to be kind. Do it because you want to help out, not because you think you can change the world. You will not be able to change the world, or you will be able to change a tiny little bit. But don't do it for that reason. Do it simply because you want to be kind, because you want to help your fellow human beings. Then you're doing the right thing here. So this is how to overcome this anxiety. Good people have a good future. Be a good person. You too will have a good future. Dear Venerable Sir, in order to expand one's general knowledge of different Buddhist traditions around the world, where can we find a simple and unbiased comparison covering areas such as core beliefs, meditation, and related practices, etc.? Thank you, and much merit to you for helping us out and having this monthly retreat. Okay, so where can you find anything about the different Buddhist traditions around the world? If I were you, I would just go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is now a very reliable resource. Yeah, usually you can trust Wikipedia, very easily accessible online. Yeah, so that's where I would go and just search under Buddhism. Start with Buddhism, and you will probably find a lot of good information there. So you can read about that. I would not recommend you to spend too much time on this kind of thing. It's a little bit interesting, but it's not incredibly useful. What you will find if you do this kind of research is that in Sri Lanka, with the Pali tradition, we already have the best scriptures in the world. Yeah, these are the best scriptures. If you go to the four main Nikayas, the Digha Nikaya, the Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, this is the word of the Buddha. We already have that, so you don't really need to go very far afield. If you have a little bit of interest, have a look at it. But remember that the main thing to read, the main thing to understand are the suttas of the Buddha. And as you start to understand them, that is where the inspiration, the motivation to practice this Buddhist path actually comes from.
That's all the questions, Bhante.
Okay. I saw a hand go up in the hall there. Does someone want to ask a question at the back there? I saw, or is that is that not allowable, or is that don't know?
No, it's perfectly okay. Anybody?
Yeah.
Any question?
No.
Yep. No.
Okay, good.
We can call it a day, Bhante, if you can do the usual ending. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So very good. Yeah. Okay, so nice to see you all again, and just to wish you all the very best in your practice, and I hope that you make nice progress, as we were talking about today, increase in good qualities and decline in bad qualities. Let's do a quick sharing of the merit just to finish off. Edang me nyate nang hotu sukita hontu nyata yo. Edang me nyate nang hotu sukita hontu nyata yo. Edang me nyate nang hotu sukita hontu nyata yo. Okay, bye-bye everyone. Take care and see you next time.